How well do you really know the people you call family? Imagine standing in your own home, only to receive a message that completely shatters your entire reality. Before we dive into how a single afternoon destroyed my 8-year marriage, I want to know, where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments below. My name is Maddie. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday. I was folding laundry on the couch, a cup of tea cooling on the coffee table beside me. The apartment smelled of fabric softener and the faint aroma of the soup I'd made for lunch. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Little did I know, this seemingly peaceful afternoon would destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my home, and the woman who claimed to be family. My phone buzzed on the cushion next to me. Without thinking, I picked it up, expecting a grocery reminder or a casual message from a friend. What I saw made the air leave my lungs in a silent rush. It was from my husband, Ryan, the man I'd built 8 years of my life around, whose shirts I had just been smoothing with my hands. The message was short and venomous. "Mom just called me. She says you pushed her down the stairs. I don't know what's wrong with you. Get ready. I'm leaving work right now and you're going to regret this." I read it 3 times, the words blurring at the edges as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Surprisingly, my hands were steady. Inside, I felt cold and completely numb, but my hands remained still. I set the phone down and walked to the window. I needed to put some distance between myself and those words, to find something real to focus on while I tried to make sense of the madness. Looking down from our 3rd-floor window, I saw Ryan's mother, Mrs. Thompson. She was 63 years old, a woman with a sharp mind and an obsession with control. Her gray hair was pulled back in her signature tight bun, and she carried herself with an air of absolute authority. There she stood at the entrance of our building, perfectly upright, handbag on her arm, and her phone pressed to her ear. She was talking animatedly, showing absolutely no signs of the severe injury she claimed to have suffered. A cold, clear realization crystallized in my chest. I knew exactly what had happened. I knew what she had told Ryan, and I was certain this wasn't going to end with a simple conversation. It was going to be a reckoning. To understand what happened that Tuesday, I need to take you back to how it all began. Ryan and I met 9 years ago at a friend's housewarming party. It was a lively gathering full of laughter and chatter. He was sitting in the corner telling jokes, effortlessly making everyone around him smile. I was immediately drawn to his infectious energy and kind eyes. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. 2 years later, we married in a small, beautiful ceremony in his hometown. My parents, both school teachers, were incredibly warm and supportive. They loved Ryan and welcomed him into our family with open arms. Mrs. Thompson, on the other hand, was a completely different story. As a successful businesswoman, she was used to getting her way. From the very beginning, she had an opinion on absolutely everything: how I decorated our apartment, what I cooked for dinner, and even whether my career as a graphic designer was stable enough. She would call Ryan every single day, sometimes multiple times. Their conversations always left him looking deflated, like a balloon with a slow leak. Ryan would always defend her, saying, "She means well, Maddie. She just doesn't know how to express it." I tried to be understanding, but over time, it became exhausting. For the first few years, I did everything I could to get along with her. I brought her flowers on her birthday, remembered the names of her friends, and sat through endless family dinners listening to stories about Ryan's childhood. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. What she really wanted wasn't a relationship with me. She wanted me to step aside so she could maintain total control over Ryan's life. The real turning point came 6 months before that fateful Tuesday. My grandmother, a kind and gentle woman, passed away after a long illness. She left me her apartment in the suburbs. It wasn't a large or luxurious place, but it was filled with priceless memories. I was overjoyed at the prospect of us having a place that was truly our own. When Mrs. Thompson learned about the inheritance, she initially seemed surprisingly supportive. She called to offer help with the move and asked about our renovation plans. I was incredibly grateful, foolishly thinking that maybe things were finally changing between us. I was wrong. Moving day was a sunny Saturday in September. Ryan had arranged for some friends to help with the heavy furniture, and I had spent the previous week packing with pure excitement. Mrs. Thompson showed up entirely unannounced at noon. She walked into the apartment carrying cleaning supplies and an undeniable air of entitlement. She opened cupboards without asking, inspected the walls, and picked up one of my grandmother's antique vases. I felt a sharp pang of discomfort, but I forced myself to remain polite. That evening, as we sat on the floor of the half-furnished living room eating pizza, Mrs. Thompson set down her slice and looked directly at me. "Maddie," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I think you should give me a key to the apartment. Just in case of emergencies." I was taken aback. I waited for her to elaborate, but she just stared at me, waiting. "I appreciate the thought," I replied, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "But I don't think that's necessary. If there's an emergency, you can just call us and we'll be here quickly." The rigid smile on her face didn't waver, but I could see a flash of cold fury in her eyes. "Of course," she said. "I understand." She left an hour later, but I knew the matter was far from over. In the weeks that followed, her unannounced visits escalated. She would bring small gifts or ask trivial questions about the renovations, but it was a transparent power play to assert her presence. I began to dread the sound of her knock on the door. When I brought it up to Ryan, explaining that I needed clear boundaries, he took the exact same stance as always: "She means well." I begged him to talk to her, to ask her to call before coming over, but he never did. And if he did, it made no difference. A few months later, I started noticing disturbing anomalies. A kitchen drawer I knew I had organized a certain way was suddenly rearranged. A folder on the hallway shelf had been clearly moved. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew someone was invading my space. That Tuesday morning, Ryan left for work like any other day. He kissed me on the forehead, though his mind seemed entirely elsewhere. Mrs. Thompson called at 9:30 a.m., but I let it ring. Months ago, I would have answered instantly, but I was completely drained by her constant demands. At 11 a.m., the familiar knock echoed through the apartment. 2 short taps, 1 long. I was in the kitchen making coffee, and my heart instantly sank. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes, composed myself, and opened the door. She was wearing a sharply tailored suit, her hair perfectly in place. Walking past me without an invitation, she sat directly at the kitchen table. I quietly made her a cup of tea and sat across from her, waiting. After a tense silence, she opened her handbag, pulled out a legal document, and placed it on the table between us. I looked at it, refusing to touch it. It was a co-ownership agreement for the apartment. Listed clearly on the page were my name, Ryan's name, and hers. "What is this?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's a co-ownership agreement," she explained smoothly, as if speaking to a child. "I've had it drawn up by my lawyer. It's only fair that I hold a 1/3 share in this apartment." I was stunned. "This is my apartment," I said firmly. "It was left to me by my grandmother. There is absolutely nothing to formalize." She leaned forward, dropping her voice to a manipulative soften. "Maddie, you have to understand. Ryan is my son, and this is his home, too. I've done so much for him. I deserve a share." My anger was boiling over. "You are not owed a single inch of my grandmother's property." Her face hardened instantly. "Ryan thinks this is entirely reasonable," she snapped. Those 7 words hit me like a physical punch to the gut. "Ryan thinks this is reasonable," I repeated, the words tasting foreign and bitter in my mouth. She nodded triumphantly. "We discussed it last week. He agrees that it makes perfect sense. He was going to talk to you himself, but you know how he is. He hates conflict." I stood up, unable to believe the betrayal. I picked up the document and flipped through the pages. On the 3rd page, there was a signature line above my name. But it wasn't my handwriting. It was a blatant forgery. A wave of cold, calculated rage washed over me. "Whose signature is this?" I demanded. She stumbled, attempting to spin an explanation, but I cut her off instantly. "This is a forgery. I have never seen this document in my life." She stood up, her expression freezing into ice. "You are being hysterical." "I am being incredibly calm," I replied, staring her down. "Please leave my apartment. Now." She walked toward the door, and I followed at a distance. When she reached the landing, she turned, threw a cruel remark over her shoulder, and marched down the stairs. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed with that threatening message from Ryan. As I watched her lying on the phone from the window, spinning her web of fiction, I realized I had about 40 minutes before Ryan arrived. I needed to act fast. First, I called my father, a retired accountant known for his absolute rationality. He told me not to touch the document anymore, to take high-resolution photos of every page, and said he was on his way. Next, I called my close friend Lily, a lawyer specializing in contract disputes. She confirmed that this was outright document fraud and advised me to secure all my paperwork immediately. For the next 25 minutes, I documented everything. I took screenshots of Ryan's texts, wrote a detailed timeline of the morning, and gathered my grandmother's original will and the official property registration. I emailed copies of everything to Lily and myself. My father arrived in under 20 minutes. He sat at the kitchen table, listening intently as I laid out the betrayal. When I finished, he asked quietly, and Ryan knew. I looked down. She claimed they discussed it and he agreed. My father pondered for a moment. The forged signature, was it a good attempt? Close, I admitted, but I know my own handwriting. He nodded grimly. Yes, you do. Shortly after, heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs. Ryan burst through the door, his face flushed with anger from the drive. But the moment he saw my father sitting calmly at the table, he froze. His expression shifted instantly. I could see him recalculating the entire situation in real time. Mrs. Thompson slipped in right behind him. She tried to look composed, but there was a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes. I asked them both to sit. Calmly, I laid out the reality of the situation, the fraudulent co-ownership agreement, the forged signature, and Ryan's documented, threatening text message. I informed them that this was a serious criminal offense and that legal counsel had already been notified. Ryan looked at his mother, and I watched a silent, guilty exchange pass between them. That was the moment I knew Mrs. Thompson hadn't been lying about one thing. Ryan had known about the plan, even if he hadn't anticipated the forgery. Lily arrived 40 minutes later alongside Tom, a property lawyer. Tom laid down the law with chilling precision. The forgery was a crime, and Ryan's text message constituted a documented threat. Mrs. Thompson desperately tried to justify her actions, whining that she was just protecting her son's interests. Tom cut her off entirely. Your son's wife is the sole registered owner of this property. A fraudulent agreement isn't protection, Mrs. Thompson. It is fraud. Over the following weeks, the legal gears turned. Tom filed a formal complaint, and after intense negotiations, their legal team formally acknowledged that the signature was a fraud and the document held zero legal standing. I ultimately chose not to press criminal charges, not for her sake, but because I didn't want to completely ruin the rest of Ryan's life. Late one night, Ryan and I finally had an honest conversation. He broke down, explaining how his mother had manipulated him into believing the agreement was for our future wealth. He admitted he knew it was wrong, but confessed he simply didn't know how to say no to her. I looked at the man I had loved for nearly a decade and said, "You need to choose, Ryan. Choose between the man you actually want to be, or the puppet your mother needs you to be." He was silent for a long time before whispering, "I don't know if I know how." We separated that spring. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming split. We were eerily civil as we signed the divorce paperwork. Ryan moved back into his mother's neighborhood, and I stayed right here, in my apartment. Mrs. Thompson took the defeat terribly. She played the victim to anyone who would listen, painting me as the villain who destroyed her son's life. But I didn't care. I knew the truth, and the law did too. When autumn arrived, my father came over for dinner. We sat at the very same kitchen table, and I cooked the exact soup my grandmother used to make. The apartment was filled with that warm, familiar, safe aroma. After dinner, my father looked around the room and smiled gently. "She would be so proud of you, Maddie." I knew he was right. The apartment was entirely mine, a sanctuary filled with beautiful memories of the woman who actually loved me. Today, the keys hanging on the hook by the door aren't just for a flat, they are a symbol of my absolute independence. Now, when I hear a knock on my door, I don't feel fear. Because I know it's only ever someone I actually want to see. I've learned the hard way that some doors, once you finally realize who you are much better left closed.